Thank you, Julie. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today to share information about family promise, community organizing, direct service, and public policy advocacy. I certainly had no idea almost 25 years ago that giving a sandwich to a homeless woman in New York City outside the steps of Grand Central Station would lead to the founding of an organization. But I can tell you with three things: passion, persistence, and good strategy, many things are possible. I'll share a little bit about the founding of the organization because I don't come to this position having a master's in public administration or public service. I certainly have a heart in that and have had a heart in that for some time. But as Julie mentioned, at the time I was in corporate America. I was marketing Schick razors and blades and Listermann mouthwash, developing consumer promotions, sweepstakes, and couponing events to move product off the shelf. I was very happy. I was successful, and I was looking for the next promotion. But somewhere deep in my heart, I had that yearning for service. You see, as a high school student, I regularly volunteered. When I got married, we had people who were young girls who were in reform school over at our house for the holidays, and people who were in need. But that service work was very much a volunteer activity until one day I was going into New York to meet with our advertising agency. This was in the early 80s, and I was about to pass Grand Central Station, about to pass a woman in front of Grand Central Station who I had passed before, who was homeless, who sat on a crate with all her belongings around her. And on impulse, I ran across the street and got her a sandwich, just to drop it and run. But as I gave her the sandwich, she took my hand. I learned about Millie's life, and as I went back a few years, she had been married, she had been hospitalized, she had been deinstitutionalized and so on, but she was somebody's mother, somebody's wife. She had a life, but because she was off her medications and homeless, she was in front of Grand Central Station. Her response and her sharing her story with me motivated me to tell my two sons, who were then 10 and 12, about Millie. And they said, well, Mom, let's go back into New York with more sandwiches. You see, I don't know if you recall, but homelessness, the word homeless was not in our vocabulary until about the mid-'80s. But now it was hard to walk a city block without seeing somebody who was obviously homeless. So we began bringing sandwiches into New York City to people who were homeless, actually to Port Authority Bus Terminal, where we saw that people gathered. They actually slept in the basement and would come up and sit on the benches in Port Authority Bus Terminal. So every other Sunday we would do that and bring the sandwiches, and the sandwiches were really a vehicle to get to know folks and say hello, and they waited for us. But little did I know that that was really the tip of the iceberg, that for every one person I saw, there were another 20 I didn't see, and I didn't recognize a mom pushing a stroller with a 5-year-old by her side. I didn't understand family homelessness. I then turned to my own state in New Jersey and began attending Governor Kane's task force meetings on family homelessness. This was in 1983. And I learned at that time that families were the fastest growing segment of the homeless population, and at that time the number one reason the kids were taken from their parents and placed in foster care was not abuse or neglect, it was simply homelessness. In other words, if you're a good parent but you can't put a roof over your children's head, your kids could be taken away. And I thought, wow, does the community know? Because you certainly don't see homeless families around. You don't see homeless families around for good reason, because they're sleeping in their car behind Walmart and behind churches. They're doubling and tripling up, and maybe they're in shelters if they can find shelters, or they're staying in inexpensive welfare motels or cheap motels until their money runs out. So I thought, I wonder if the religious community knew, would they want to get involved? And I say the religious community because I was looking for a group that had a mandate to serve, right? And certainly the religious community has a mandate to serve. But I didn't want to invite any one denomination. I wanted to invite all faiths, because I believe whether you're Muslim, Christian, or Jew, we all have a mandate for service. So I planned an interfaith conference inviting a target group, if you will, that had a mandate to serve, to hear not about Millie, who I met in front of Grand Central Station, or Abe, who was a regular in Port Authority, but to hear about family homelessness. 200 people came to that all-day conference in October 1985 to hear about family homelessness. People cared. They wanted to make a difference. I was encouraged. I'm equally encouraged, and even more so, with now 135,000 volunteers from 5,000 congregations involved. So we had the conference. Conferences are nice, but they're only effective if there's a plan of action. So I knew I wanted to keep up the momentum. So I began having regular meetings with whoever wanted to show up. We met every 2 weeks. 20 to 30 people showed up at Christ Church in Summit, New Jersey, our meeting place. We were looking for a building to renovate, a building to buy, but there was much red tape. Nobody wanted a homeless shelter in their backyard, and it was going to be expensive. Not one church or synagogue could be a full-time shelter, but we soon realized, what if we all worked together? Maybe we could do together what we couldn't do alone. So 10 churches and 1 synagogue came forward and agreed to provide hospitality. Hospitality is an important word because we knew it wasn't just going to be about shelter, it was going to be relationship with the religious community. So we called it Interfaith Hospitality Network. It opened its doors in October of 1986. And I'd have to say, when we opened our doors, it was about providing basic shelter and meals, because you see, the other shelters in the community were not only turning families away, but one of those shelters in Elizabeth, it was goodbye, God bless you, at 7:30 in the morning, and whether you were an able-bodied 30-year-old male or a pregnant 27-year-old female, you had to walk, and then you had to walk all day and come back and line up to see if you had a bed. We knew that we didn't want to do that, so the word hospitality was very important, but we also had to find a day center for families during the day. Now this is very important because there's 5 components that exist in every community, and we mobilized existing resources. We didn't build or renovate a building. We didn't hire an extensive staff. We mobilized what exists. We tapped the mandate of the faith community and the generous spirit of Americans. We mobilized 5 community resources. Houses of worship that actually have quite a bit of space, especially during the week. Not one could be a full-time shelter, but again, it's something a congregation could do 4 times a year. Houses of worship, a space for a day center for families, and I don't mean a drop-in center that you'll find in major cities where people who are homeless just come and gather. This was a special dedicated space for families where they would have a dress, they would have showers, it was a home base for them as they looked for housing and jobs. So the Y provided space for a day center. Social service agencies were all too glad to refer families. Autoland discounted a van because we needed transportation for families from the day center to the host congregation. And to my surprise, hundreds of volunteers came out. Now, bringing your children into New York to give sandwiches to the homeless in New York City is not for everyone, right? But if you do say to folks, help homeless families, and you talk about families like them that are struggling, and you make it easy for folks to get involved. We weren't asking them to drive 20 miles to a shelter to get involved. We were saying, come back to your own community, to your own house of worship. Prepare a meal, stay overnight, volunteers with your children. So that's how so many volunteers get involved, typically 800 or more in a particular program. So it started out as a basic shelter program, but what I saw as a hallmark then, that first week in October of 1986, is true today, having served more than 350,000 people. And it's simply this. Yes, close to 80% find housing in nine weeks, but there's something else. It was Maria and her 12-year-old daughter, Nicole, that stayed at the first host congregation, Christ Church. And the week runs from Sunday to Sunday. So Sunday afternoon, the families leave and the van comes. So after that very first host week, when everybody was very nervous, the volunteers more so than the families, the van pulled up and the families were packing up their things to go to the next church, the Methodist church. And little Nicole, who had befriended the coordinator of the program, Isabel Devaney, they became fast friends during that week, and also with her mother, Maria. As Nicole went to get on the van, she came running back because she realized it was the last time she would see her friend, Isabel Devaney, the coordinator, and she came running back up to her, and she gave her a big hug, and she said, "Miss Devaney, I'm leaving now to go to the next church." She said, "But I want you to know that Christ Church will always be my home." What she was saying is, I felt at home. You treated me like family. You cared for me. And that's one of the hallmarks. Yes, ending homelessness, first and foremost, is about producing enough affordable housing that people can spend a third of their income on housing. It's about jobs that provide a living wage. But it's also about healing the hurt of homelessness. Because when you heal the hurt of homelessness, and you're in a caring environment, families feel good about who they are. And that's one of the hallmarks of Family Promise. When I spoke with George at our Dalton affiliate last week, when I met with Dalton George, I met with him at the day center. George is a volunteer at our Dalton affiliate, but he came up to me and he said, "Karen, I can't thank you enough." He was really thanking all the volunteers for starting Family Promise. It changed my life. Now, George didn't say, "Thank you for the wonderful home-cooked meals or the safe place to stay." He began to talk about the very volunteers involved. He talked about Nancy, an RN from that affiliate, who worked very closely with his wife, encouraging her all the way to get her LPN. And now that she's out of the program, they're still working together, working on her RN. Well, Jasmine never had that support in her family. Lo and behold, she became homeless. And yes, it's about shelter and getting on your way and finding housing. But that context allowed the opportunity for a relationship for Nancy to get to know Jasmine. And how valuable is that? And Jasmine now is realizing her dream of becoming a registered nurse and has a mentor. This happened because the two were allowed to meet. Or let's look at George. George grew up in a very, very unhappy home. He would leave right after school and go out into the woods where he had a tree hut. He lived with an abusive family life. And he said he would go up in that tree hut and he would dream of a better day and dream of having kids of his own. And he learned carpentry skills as he built that tree hut. He was in the program, and he had been working for a carpet company that downsized and he lost his job, but he had these carpentry skills. And he met Eric, who had an air conditioning and heating business, and Eric said, "You want a home repair business, a carpentry business? Let's work together." So he helped him form that business, and not surprisingly, many of the volunteers are his clients. The point I'm making, and the real value behind Family Promise, is the opportunity to engage folks. 135,000 people, I think you would agree, is a large number. How does it happen? Because they're allowed to work locally. And while the program itself is a success, the relationships that are formed change lives. So when I met George at that day center, it was, Family Promise changed my life. I got to tell you, Family Promise didn't change his life. He changed his life. But caring people in the community, like you and you and you and you, changed his life. What Family Promise does very well, we provide the system and the structure to engage people. It's not the Family Promise program, it's the method we employed. Now, I'd love to tell you that almost 25 years ago, I sat down with this master plan and said, we've got to engage Americans across this country. There's not enough people that care about poverty, and I'm going to develop a strategy that effectively engages people in local communities. No, my initial goal was to provide the shelter and the meals, but now hindsight, almost 25 years later, I look back and I say, here are the outcomes Close to 80% find housing in just 9 weeks. We have a recidivism rate that is lower than 5%. More than 700 partnerships and community initiatives have developed. Again, not by Family Promise, but people who sit in their own houses of worship and hear about a mom who says, our money ran out, we had no place to stay, we were staying in a motel, and we ended up staying in our car parked behind the church. We were ashamed. It was myself and my husband and my two children. We were down to 97 cents. 97 cents will buy you Vienna sausages, which my 1.5-year-old daughter loves. And we stayed there for 3 weeks before we found Family Promise. No family in America should have to live in their car behind a church or Walmart or government agency or anywhere. It shouldn't happen. But once you engage local communities, solutions are found. More than 700 community initiatives have been developed that include housing. We operate 500 units of housing, our affiliates do. Financial literacy programs, parenting, health care, and child care. And child care, in Augusta, they have a child care program for all homeless children in Augusta. Why? Because Gary Billingsley, a pediatrician, got involved in his own church, and he said, how do we expect these families to find housing and jobs if there's no affordable child care? We didn't develop the child care program. Our local affiliate didn't develop it. Gary Billingsley developed it because he got involved. And now I'm going back to the group that I told you I originally called on, the faith community. Well, any faith community has a mandate for service and justice. So about 8 years ago, we developed, with the support of the Ford Foundation, a program called Just Neighbors, which is a multimedia interactive curriculum on poverty. It's designed to educate our volunteers about why the families are in our churches in the first place. It, in a very interactive way, engages people on what it costs to afford housing and what happens if you're working as a nurse's aide or a truck driver or a cashier. How do you afford housing? How do you afford health care? How do you afford child care? And as you begin to balance that budget, you see it's a near impossibility to be able to afford housing at about 1/3 of your income. In fact, there's no state in the country that allows someone who's working minimum wage to afford the fair market 2-bedroom rental. I mean, this is important. Homelessness, solving homelessness is about engaging volunteers, but don't get me wrong, that is not the solution. The solution to homelessness in this country is sound public policy and a housing policy that helps ensure all families have a decent and affordable place to call home. So we have a program called Voices Uniting, where we equip those congregations and volunteers who want to be involved in public policy. We've been involved in helping to reshape the definition of family homelessness, because there's an awful lot of families that don't count as homeless. You know, if you're doubled or tripled up, you don't count as being homeless. We've also worked on housing policy and helped support the National Housing Trust Fund. I worry sometimes, as wonderful as organizations are that involve so many volunteers, we can never be seen as a replacement for public policy. So I'm a big believer that direct service should lead to public policy. Now let's go back a few minutes to when I started this talk, and I said I was motivated to create a shelter, and you know, there was a roadblock, and so I got folks together, and this is what we came up with. But let's now look back at that and say, oh, what Family Promise is about, it's about shelter, but mostly it's a community engagement model. I get it. They tap a group that has a mandate to help the faith community. They make it easy for them to get involved. They don't ask them to drive 10 or 15 miles. They bring homeless families to their own house of worship and get them involved. Once they sit around a table like that and hear the stories of family members struggling on little money, low-paying service jobs at hours reduced with no health care or no child care, or dad that's very, very disappointed because he's been looking for housing for 3 months and the Section 8 certificate waiting list is closed and there's no affordable housing, that motivates people. to get involved because you're giving them the experience. Now homelessness is no longer a headline, well, it doesn't make the headlines anymore, but no longer an article in the news. It's not a sermon on Sunday or a prayer on Sunday or walking by someone where you wish you could make a difference and do something. These are real people you've come to know. So Family Promise today involves, as I said, 135,000 volunteers, 164 affiliates. We have another 30 in development. Last year we served 49,000 people. Almost 2/3 of them were at-risk families because we help to prevent homelessness through our mentoring program and referral to other programs, and about close to 1/3 of them were homeless. And so our business, really, the business Family Promise is in, not the shelter business. It's about engaging communities in direct service, community development, and public policy. And that's pretty much our model through focusing on an initial singular need, family homelessness, a target group, forgive me for those from the religious community to call you a target group, but a target group, people who have a mandate to help. Now see, I'm using some of my marketing, no longer marketing Schick razors and blades and Listerine mouthwash to consumers. I am marketing family homelessness to the religious community. And here's the other part. Just like in any marketing principle, you have to fulfill a need. And oh boy, let me tell you a little bit about that need, about people in pews who say, I go to church or I go to synagogue, but I want to live out my faith. Just don't want to donate canned goods and clothing or write checks. I'll continue to do that, but I want to touch somebody's lives. I want to make a difference. So we're not only helping to fill a need for homeless families, we're fulfilling a need for people sitting in congregations who say, I want to make a difference. And by the way, about 10% of our volunteers are unaffiliated, with any congregation. You don't have to be a member of a congregation to get involved, but and many others do. But it's all about focusing on a need, target audience, and then focusing on the outcomes that you seek to achieve. So that's pretty much Family Promise in a nutshell. I'm delighted to be in Little Rock because our affiliate here that used to be called IHN is now open, Family Promise of Pulaski County. And by the way, we changed our name because the issue we're dealing with is not homelessness. Homelessness is just a symptom of a deeper issue, and the issue is poverty. So when we say Family Promise, we're saying our promise is to help ensure that all families have a decent, affordable place to go home, jobs that pay a living wage, health care, child care. It also says that families have so much promise and potential if given the right help at the right time. And so that's the reason we've changed our name to continue to work with communities nationwide.